Today on the Locked On Cowboys podcast, we are taking your questions. Which side of the ball will be the strength of this team? Where has there been the most improvement on this squad? We will answer all those questions and more on today's episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. I am your host, Landon McCool. We'd like to thank you for making the Locked On Cowboys your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Coming up on today's show, I'm going to be answering a bunch of you guys' questions. I'll answer a question about Josh Ball, who has been a surprise development in this training camp, to say the least. We'll definitely examine whether the offense or the defense will be the strength of this team in the 2024 season. But first up, we got a question from a friend of the show, at Ball from Grace, and he writes in asking, what part of the offense do you think has the best chance to improve this season? This is an interesting question. I think, obviously there's been a lot of discussion about the contracts going on with Dak Prescott, the contract going on with CeeDee Lamb. Frankly, that's almost all that anybody is talking about at this point. But I think that we haven't really had a conversation about some of the youth movement that's happened specifically on offense that should get some folks really excited. I think you could easily point to some of the movement on the down roster wide receiver spots and say, hey, look at, obviously CD and Cooks are kind of the same thing that from last year. You hope to see maybe some improvement now that Cooks has got another year with Dak to kind of, get that chemistry going. And with CeeDee Lamb's contract situation, you hope that he comes back and is able to kind of mold himself back into the offense really quickly and get up to speed so that he can get ready for week one. And I think you look at all the improvement with Jalen Brooks and Jalen Tolbert and some of these guys, and yeah, some of those guys have been up and down a little bit. I think that there is definitely some improvement there, but to me, the spot on the offense where I feel like the most improvement is going to happen is on this young offensive line. I mean, I don't think that's too shocking for anybody, but I do think that, the reasons why are maybe a little bit shocking. I think Tyler Guyton, being as good as he has been out here in this training camp field as quickly as he has is surprising, is shocking, and in a very positive way. And frankly, at this point, we should learn our lesson to kind of trust the Cowboys and trust Duke Mayweather and OL Performance to kind of get these guys ready to go. And clearly he's had a lot of success with Tyler Smith previously and Tyler Guyton. So I guess we shouldn't be surprised any further, like if this happens in the future, if the Cowboys are able to get a guy that seemingly is a developmental offensive lineman up and running very quickly. That's basically what they do. And I also think that Cooper Beebe was a guy that, if anything, maybe is a little bit behind schedule what you expected of him going into training camp. I think he has finally kind of caught up. He's evened out a lot, and it looks a lot more comfortable. And now he's actually getting to kind of avail himself of his skills now that he's not thinking about it as much. It seems like he's actually just playing. You can tell because he's playing guard with the level of physicality that he's playing center now, which means that I think he's comfortable playing center in the way that he's comfortable playing guard, which is obviously a good thing. Both of those two things, those two guys and their improvement is mostly kind of anticipated, right? Like we knew that those guys were coming in. They were high draft picks, likely to be starters on this offensive line. I think where the surprising element of this came is the kind of middle, just behind the starter talent, right? The kind of Awesome Richards, the Tyler Basses. I mean, we knew Tyler Bass would be good. I think, it's been lost in the shuffle of how quickly we want to get Cooper Beebe into the starting role. But I think Brock Hoffman had an incredible offseason. He looks like a completely different player. And so, between Awesome Richards and Hoffman and Bass, and frankly, we're going to talk about another guy and a little bit later, Josh Ball, who has had an incredible camp and an incredible training camp, really kind of turned things around. So I think if there's one spot where, as the season kind of goes on, as we start to see the September turn into October into November, I think you're going to start to see, obviously the starters that are out there kind of improve and take their step to kind of surpass last year's offensive line. I would say that, by the time we get to December and January, this will probably be a better offensive line and maybe even a significantly better offensive line than it was at that point last year, simply because I think you've got more talented people you got a more talented guy at the center. I love Biotish, but I think that BB is just a bigger more physical player with a little bit more talent. And I just think that, and this is nothing against Tyron Smith, and Tyron Smith is, probably one of the best, if not the best, left tackle to ever play for the Dallas Cowboys. I think that there's a good chance that Guyton is just a better player by the end of the year. With the injury situation with Tyron Smith, and just as he continues to kind of age, I think it's not unrealistic to expect that, especially with the way that Guyton has improved, like we've talked about in this training camp. I don't think it's unreasonable to think that he passes that kind of Rubicon of where Tyron Smith is at some point this season. So, I think the offensive line is the area in which we are looking for the most improvement on the offense. And I think that's, kind of lines up with what the Cowboys' plan was this offseason as well. So, they made a concerted effort to kind of get stronger, get better at that position. And it feels like they did. And I think not only is it, like I said, the starters that have improved, that's going to kind of raise the floor on that room, but it's the immediate backups as well that seem to have really taken a step, especially the Awesome Richards, the Josh Balls, the Brock Hoffmans of the world. And, you can't forget TJ Bass. It's to the point where the Cowboys may have, if they, end up liking what they see out of young Nathan Thomas, who's another draft pick this year, they may have the opportunity to kind of flip one of these guys for another position that they need, running back, or maybe another defensive tackle if that's what they're looking for. So I wouldn't be shocked if this large collection of decent offensive linemen didn't all end up on the Cowboys roster before the season starts, and that maybe one of them ends up on another team in another jersey for a trade of a draft pick or player at a position that the Cowboys definitely need. All right, that was great. We have another question coming up here in a little bit about the improvement of a certain offensive lineman who I just spoke about. We will talk about him next. Folks, you heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you now. Through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with your YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Guys, the Cowboys are currently plus 1,800 to win the Super Bowl. I'm just saying, it's only $5. Put your $5 in, get your 3 free weeks, enjoy life. Just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to download America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn to download America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Thank you for making Locked On Cowboys podcast your first listen today. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast. Get daily insight to the best fantasy draft strategies so you can win your league this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, our next question comes from @BellR. That's @BELLARR05, who asks, what are your thoughts on Josh Ball? I thought he might have been included in your ep about young guys who have turned it around. Ball is the word ball. The name Ball is a theme today, right? First question was from Ball from Grace. This is about Josh Ball, and we're going to talk about which side of the ball is better in the next segment. So, I think that it's tough, right? Like, Josh Ball came in with some domestic abuse stuff, and that's really colored all of our opinions on him. It's hard. We're human beings, right? And the stuff that came out about him, is ugly and was not cool. It's definitely in his past, but it's still something that happened that he did. And we all kind of have to deal with rooting for someone who did something so awful. putting that aside for just a moment, he hadn't played well previous to this. That's the other part of it, right? And it makes it easier to kind of talk about a guy that you don't like when he's playing poorly. I think that, he has had a very, very good camp. He's had a very good training camp and preseason. I think he's played so well at guard at certain points that now they've started to look at him more of a tackle. And I think that the reasoning is very similar to what they're doing with Awesome Richards, right? Awesome, they like a lot more at tackle, and they've been playing him at guard. And the reason is because I think they're trying to figure out a way to have a left side and a right side backup, right? Josh Ball be your right side backup. Awesome Richards be your left side backup. If a left guard or a left tackle goes out, it's Awesome. If a right guard or a right tackle goes out, it's Ball. I think that that's where they're trying to generally trend for like game day, injury plans. And then obviously a guy like Brock Hoffman would be, or TJ Bass would be the kind of the swing interior guy or something like that. So I think that it's tough to talk about because, again, he not a very well liked player because of that history there. But I think this is a guy that, had a lot of natural skills, right? He's a long player. He's strong. He's tall. He's got good levers. He had some decent strength, but he needed to kind of improve it a little bit more with his body type to kind of be effective. And it feels like he did. I've just seen a lot of positive reps from him at different points in one-on-one situations, in-game situations. And the negative reps I've seen from him have mostly been early when he was transitioning back into playing some tackle in this training camp, right? Most of the time when he's been in there at guard, he's looked pretty solid. And certainly worthy of either being, on the roster or certainly like someone that's going to be potentially playing snaps if there's an injury or to somebody, or at least getting pulled up to the roster if there's an injury. So I think that, again, it's hard to kind of look past the kind of off-field coloration of this guy and how we've put him into this box of guys that we just don't like. And I, continue to may not like what he did personally at all. But I think as far as what he's done on the football field, he's made vast improvements from where he was last year to the point where, yeah, I think you're right, Brian. I think he could have been a guy that I could have included in my career turnarounds list yesterday, because again, for all the stuff that we just talked about in the offseason, he may not be worth a flyer if he doesn't kind of if he hadn't shown any improvement, because it may just be more of a headache, more of a risk that a team thinks is worth. But now with the way he's played this offseason, and I think maybe that's why I didn't include him on the list, is because it didn't come down to this last game for Josh Ball. He's been having a fairly good training camp and preseason even before this. So I'm pretty sure I read somewhere, and it's, too bad Marcus isn't here to give us but I'm pretty sure that at one point he was the highest rated offensive lineman in the preseason. So he clearly not for the team, I think in the NFL. So clearly he, is really kind of found something that's turned it around and improved himself enough that the Cowboys didn't feel like they had to focus him solely at guard, that they wanted to kind of give him flex to see exactly what he can do. But it's become abundantly clear that he's made improvements to the point where that he's in the conversation for not only being on the roster, but potentially being on the game day roster as a guy that is, a key backup on that right side. Now, the preseason still isn't over yet. There is still a lot of these guys that are, kind of still making moves. What does any of this mean for Nathan Thomas, who we mentioned earlier is a draft pick who's been kind of dealing with injury stuff? So it's been a little bit difficult to kind of evaluate him. All of that is still very, very much to be decided. And no one's job is, written in stone yet. But having said all that, I could not have been more surprised, I think, with the kind of results that we've seen from Ball coming back from a season in which he didn't play very well in the training camp. They didn't see him at all in the regular season. They moved him to guard, which you felt was more like a, kind of an interstitial step right before he gets released, basically. But that was not the case at all. It clearly feels like he has taken to guard and developed a little bit of strength to the point where even, he's even playing tackle better than he had played tackle previously. So I think that this is a situation to monitor for sure. Josh Ball is not a guy that we can just kind of simply keep out of our thoughts and, eventually he'll get cut and go away. I think that there's a chance that he makes this roster, or he's one of these guys that we just talked about in this last section where he's a guy that he could potentially be traded or maybe flip to another team for a guy that they like, or a guy that the Cowboys like that's on another team that maybe their team feels similarly about, right? That they have extra depth, flip their guy and see if it works out for both teams. So it's at least to the point where we are on Josh Ball watch. We have to at least figure out exactly what they're going to do with this asset. It's not going to be as simple as just releasing him, not with the way he's played so far this training camp. All right, coming up, we are going to talk about who has had a better side of the ball, or at least who do we think is going to be better, the offense or the defense going into this season. We'll talk about that next. Folks, I love going to live events, concerts, comedy, and obviously sporting events. I talked about last year going to the Cowboys-Chargers game last season, how fun it was to experience football in LA. It really, the only reason I don't get out to more sporting events is that it can be prohibitively expensive. But with Gametime, that isn't the case anymore. They have great ways to save you money, including the Gametime Picks feature, which filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats. I started early shopping for potential Cowboys game tickets. Sometimes if I find a good ticket, I'll even fly home to Dallas if I need to and stay with family and try to get to the game. Certainly anything that's out in California, the San Francisco game, I'm constantly trying to be looking for great deals to see if I can make it out to a Cowboys game. And folks, like, you go to the Gametime app, you check out some of the games they have. They have regular season tickets starting at under $40. Plus, with their lowest price guaranteed, you'll always be getting a great price, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Every dayers. On tomorrow's podcast, we will be looking at some more stuff from the training camp practices on the field. The Cowboys are finishing up having their last few of these padded practices. Today is actually the last padded practice in Oxnard. So we'll be taking an examination of what happened there. All those notes that come in from practice, we will be discussing them. And then on Friday, we will be obviously getting you guys ready for the Cowboys' final preseason game against the Chargers in Dallas. So make sure you guys tune in for that. Finally, for our last question, we have a question from @Matt Lingen. I hope I'm saying that right, Matt. It's @MATT_LINGEN. Lingen, maybe. So hopefully I didn't butcher your name. I apologize. In your opinion, will the defense or offense be the strength of this team this year, and why? I think this is a great question. I mean, I think, look, at times during the season last year, it was kind of tough to tell which group was better. I think the offense kind of went through its lumps early while the defense kind of was ready to go and ready to shine. And then as the season sort of played itself out a little bit, the offense, started to continue to get better. They made necessary changes in order to kind of fit what they wanted to do on offense to get CeeDee Lamb the ball some more. And obviously the Cowboys offense ended up as, one of, if not the top offense in football during the regular season. And the defense was very good. But it did seem like as the season went on, it sort of kind of petered out a little bit. So where we flash forward to the training camp situation and what we've seen out here on the field. I think you talk about the changes schematically that have happened with Zimmer, the kind of the change of thought in personnel, specifically on the defensive line and in the defensive tackle room, and what that's going to mean for stopping the run and being able to kind of play balanced defensive football. I think you look at the losses and the gains at the certain spots, and I think it's kind of a difficult evaluation at this point. But I do think that this defense is going to be better than it was last year. I think it's going to be a more consistent unit, week to week, who they're playing. I think what we're concerned about there is, will they still have the same sort of playmaking ability that they've had, that obviously they became known under Dan Quinn. You want to find a way to have that high floor while eliminating that low ceiling, of not being able to stop the run and not being able, eliminate the low floor. You want to, let me phrase that again. You want to have the high ceiling without having to have a low floor. You don't want so much variance on your defense. You'd like for it to be a little bit more reliable. You're still getting takeaways, still taking chances and being aggressive, but I think you don't need to sell out everything you're doing to stop the pass and just kind of, give a casual glance to stopping the run. And I think that's the big thing that Zimmer is going to be doing this year is, re-emphasizing the run in defense, not at the expense of the passer, but at passing attack. But I think, in a way that's a more healthy balance so that you can play the pass a little bit better because you've been able to stop the run. This is a very long-winded way of saying that I think it's difficult to kind of measure how good this defense is going to be. They're clearly full of talented stars. The question that I had coming into this year was, how would they adjust to going from a simple defense in which, there's not a lot of keys and cues, or it's very straightforward and allows you and is designed for you to play fast, which is what Dan Quinn had, or a more fundamentally sound defense that requires you to operate within a structure in order to make sure that everything is accounted for, especially in the run game. It can be a little bit of a difficult situation going from simple to complicated. So far, that biggest concern seems to have been mostly eliminated by the fact of how fast these guys are playing out here in training camp. So if that concern is eliminated, I have to imagine that it's going to be at least a very similar situation to last year, where I think this defense will come out pretty hot. I was concerned about that, obviously, in the regular season, because I wasn't sure how quickly they could catch on. But I think that considering how quickly they've caught on, considering that the offense is going to have likely 2 rookies starting on their offensive line against a very difficult series of very difficult defensive lines early, I think it could very well follow the trend that we saw last year, where the offense may struggle a little bit early. And, again, we just mentioned CeeDee Lamb still, on holdout technically. I think he gets his deals done. I think he comes in. I think he plays week 1. But I think there's also an opportunity or a chance that they try to ramp him up a little bit. They don't give him the full kind of load. So, the offense may not be as quite as effective as they would later on the season once CeeDee's kind of folded in. But I wouldn't be shocked if we got a very kind of similar trajectory. Maybe with the idea that the defense doesn't tail off at the end. That would be really great. But I think the idea that the defense will be better earlier, and the offense will kind of catch up to it as the season goes on, I think it makes some sense again this year, because of the offensive line youth, and because of CeeDee Lamb's holdout, and because I just think that the defense usually starts out ahead of offense. So all of those things, kind of project a very similar situation to what we saw last year. My hope is that, though, it's more of a case that the offense is catching up to the defense, and that the defense continues to stay sound throughout the end of the year, because it felt like the defense was just exhausted at the end of the year. And on top of that, they weren't sound enough, technically, fundamentally, to stop the run. So they were exhausted, beat up, and they didn't have the kind of structure in their defense to properly defend the run at a time when, running the football is paramount. So I'm hoping the defense starts as the better side of the team. I'm hoping then the offense catches up, but I also hoping that they don't catch up because the defense, falls off a cliff when we need them in December and January, because that obviously would portend more sadness in the playoff arena for the Cowboys, which is just not something I'm not ready to take anymore, guys. I don't know about y'all, but I'm finished with the kind of depressing ends to the season. So hopefully the Cowboys defense and offense are both fantastic as we as we start to reach the end of the year and hopefully make it into the playoffs. Guys, that's it for us. Thank you for making Locked On Podcast your first listen today. Now go listen to the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. Get daily insight for the best fantasy draft strategy so you can win your league this season. You can find the link to the Locked On Fantasy Football in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Guys, make sure you guys check us out tomorrow. Come back. We'll talk about practice. We'll be back on Friday as well to kind of get you guys ready for the weekend preseason game. And until then, happy trails, and we'll see you tomorrow.